Well, God bless you and thank you for joining me. It's a delight to continue our study with you through the entire New Testament. And we're back in Matthew chapter 19 once again today. We've been covering to some degree of depth the subject of divorce and remarriage as we looked at Jesus' words. And I'm not going to belabor that point any longer, but the conclusion of it all in verse number 10 of Matthew 19 was the response of the disciples. And the disciples said to Jesus, "If the relationship of the man with his wife is like this, it is better not to marry." Why did they say that? Well, because Jesus, made it very clear that marriage is a lifetime commitment that should not ever be broken. And the disciples of Jesus, who had all their lives sat under the teaching of the scribes and the Pharisees, who predominantly believed that you could divorce your wife for any cause at all, and therefore divorce and remarriage was rampant in Jesus' day in Israel, were shocked by Jesus' stance. And they realized, my goodness, it's not like we thought. And so because it's such a serious commitment, maybe it's just better not to get married at all. Okay, well, I'm glad they had their minds being renewed at this point in time. And verse number 11, Jesus said to them, "Not all men can accept this statement, but only to those whom it has been given." Verse 12, here's the statement. "For there are eunuchs who were born that way from their mother's womb, and there are eunuchs who were made eunuchs by men. And there are also eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. He who is able to accept this, let him accept it." So twice Jesus emphasized the fact that not everyone can accept this, only to those to whom it has been given. That is, in relationship to the things he said, one of the things he said requires a very special gift from God. Let's go back now and consider those one by one. There are eunuchs who are born that way from their mother's womb. Well, there are men who are born as eunuchs, that is, with birth defects. They're missing certain parts. And so as a result, their hormonal makeup and so forth is different, and they would have no sexual desire as a man would. And so that's what Jesus is speaking about. And so that's a birth defect. And then there are eunuchs who were made eunuchs by men. That's a historical fact. Rich guys back in ancient days sometimes found men whom they castrated to use to guard their harems. And, you don't have a women guard your harem. You want good, strong men, big men, to look threatening to anyone who might be tempted to infiltrate the harem, but you don't want the guard being tempted himself, so you take care of that by castration. Seems rather cruel to me, but it removes any possibility of him doing anything immoral with those members of the rich man's harem, and it also removes his desire to do anything immoral. And then he says there are those who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. And that's when he says, "He who is able to accept it, let him accept it." I don't believe Jesus is speaking here literally of anybody saying, "I want to serve God with all my heart, so I'm going to castrate myself." That would seem to be, not appropriate and not in line with the rest of the Bible, although there's reports of people down through the ages who have done that. But those who are given a special ability. To him who is able to accept this, let him accept it. Given a special ability by God. Even though they're not missing the parts, they have given a special ability of self-control not to have to be married, and therefore they can devote themselves fully to the kingdom of God. You know that Paul, we just read it not too long ago, was recommending singleness during his time, and he said, because the one who's married, his interests are divided. He wants to please his spouse, she wants to please her spouse, and so therefore the Lord doesn't get all of the devotion that he could be given had you been single. Well, that's a good opinion by Paul, and there's no doubt that God has used single people to do great things in his kingdom. God has also used a lot of married people. It seems that most of the disciples that Jesus was speaking to right here were married. Anyone say they didn't do great things for God? They did great things for God, okay? I'm glad I have a wife, for a lot of reasons, and she's helped me tremendously in my marriage and my personal life and so forth. I think I'm a much better follower of Jesus Christ married than I would be unmarried. That's how I feel. Okay? One other thing I might point out to you here on this whole subject of eunuchs and so forth is that sexual desire is a God-given phenomenon that most everybody experiences, okay? And so it's nothing to be ashamed of, but it's something that needs to be kept within the bounds that God has designated, and that is very clearly the bonds of marriage. You're not supposed to be having a sexual relationship with anybody with whom you are not committed to love that person and stay with that person till death do you part. And there's lots of good reasons for that, not the least of which is the fact that sex produces children, and children need a stable home with a mother and a father. That's always the best, right? Everybody knows that. And so, parents should be staying together. All right, but again, I'm just trying to emphasize the fact that we all have a desire to eat as well, but that doesn't just mean you can eat anything and everything. We have an appetite, but we're supposed to control our appetite. Okay, I notice I have a healthy prop here today. That's going to help me. So same thing in this area of sex. Nothing to be ashamed of the desire, but control the desire and make sure it's focused in a lawful, God-honoring way. Okay, all right. Talk about kids next time we come together, and so can't wait for that. I'll see you next time.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.